Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by your host, David Lucy Mabel. Today, folks, I have some very sad news. It has been announced 2 days ago that His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, has passed away at the age of 99 years old at Windsor Castle in England. Now, I know this is a car podcast, and I know that many of you who may be listening may not care much about the British royal family. I know many of you listening may want to hear solely about cars, and I promise you this will still be about cars. But I must preface that this is a special edition of the GSMC Car Podcast because of the great man of state and the great man of the people and the great icon that this world has lost. Prince Philip was much more than a British prince. He was a man of the people. He was a constant companion to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. He was famous the world over in the British Commonwealth and in all countries, really. And he will greatly be missed. He played an integral role in the, essentially in the modernization of the British royal family. And there will never be another like him. He was the longest serving consort in all of British history, a consort meaning the spouse of the monarch. And he will be greatly missed, not only by myself, but by so many other people that he inspired on a day-to-day basis. So, as a result, this podcast has been dedicated to the cars of the British royal family, because I felt like, since it is a car podcast, in order to tie in the eyes of the world being on the British royal family in this weekend and in this coming week, I should do a podcast on the cars of the British royal family. That way we still do it about cars, and I can still pay my respects in some way, shape, or form to His Majesty, not His Majesty, His Royal Highness, that's his style, His Royal Highness, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. So let's get started. So Prince Philip was known to love technology and engineering. And so cars, I feel, fit right into that category of technology and engineering. He was very enamored with modern technology and modern things. He, even into his old age, he was still keeping up to date on what was the latest trend as far as technology goes. And he was a man who was constantly reading, constantly learning, and constantly wanting to improve his skills as far as technology went. So this makes perfect sense that a car podcast would be dedicated to him. So let's start off. This is how I'm going to structure this podcast. I'm going to structure this podcast by discussing the Queen's personal car collection in segment 1. In segment 2, I'm going to be discussing the personal car collections of the other members of the royal family. And then segment 3, I'm going to be discussing the Bentley state car, which is the state vehicle that the Queen and the other senior members of the royal family are driven around in. And in segment 4, that will be dedicated to Prince Philip. Essentially, I'm going to be telling you all about different aspects of his life, what he was known for, the circumstances surrounding his passing, and other things of that sort, just for the record so people can know. Because I like to think of this car podcast as being a car podcast, for sure, but it is more educational than anything else. It is meant to teach others about different sorts of cars, about different things in history that have contributed to the rich car culture that we have today. And I feel like the British royal family, they are car enthusiasts, and a lot of people may not know that. So it is my job to educate those who may not know about the fact that the British royal family are car enthusiasts, how they have a car collection that's worth well over 10 million pounds, which is about $13 million in U.S. money. It is just my way of educating the world. And when a car icon passes, or when any icon passes, it is my job to try to tie that in to cars, especially when it comes to someone like Prince Philip, who was enamored with all things technological and engineering-wise. So that's how I'm going to structure this podcast. Please stay tuned. I really want you to hear the tribute at the end of the podcast, because it is very important, not just for the enrichment of people who are listening to this car podcast, but the enrichment of people all across the world, for them to know that an icon has left us, and that he will leave a legacy behind that will not soon be forgotten. So let's get started. Enough of the sad stuff for now. The Queen's car collection. Like I was saying earlier, it is little known about the Queen that she was actually a mechanic in World War II. And she is said to be the only member of the royal family that knows how to change a tire and that knows how to change a spark plug. This is, sort of odd to us common folk, because, that's one of the things, maybe not a spark plug, but that's one of the things, it's sort of a rite of passage for car owners, for them to learn how to change a tire, and for them to learn how to change their first tire. I learned how to change a tire back in 4th grade. I was working with my dad on our car that we had at the time. We had several cars, but one of the cars that we had at the time was a 1995 Nissan Altima. We had that thing since 1997. And by this time, we had it for 10 years. It was 2007. Wow, I can't do math. We had it for 10 years at that point, 2007. It was my mom's car that she used to drive around, and essentially it had a flat tire, so my dad and I changed it. He taught me how to change a flat tire then. So it's sort of a rite of passage. But when you're the royal family and you pay people to do things like that for you, you have people who change tires, who do the mechanic work on your cars, they don't need to know that stuff, because they literally always have someone by their side for protection and for whatever they need. I mean, they don't need to learn how to change a tire or anything of that sort. The Queen, however, is of a different time. When the Queen was growing up, and she was not expected to be queen. When she was Princess Elizabeth of York, she was expected to be just another member of the royal family, because at the time, her uncle, Prince David, who turned into King Edward VIII, abdicated the throne to Mary Wallace Simpson, thus putting her father, his younger brother, as King of England, because he didn't have any children when he abdicated, and then she all of a sudden became heir apparent. So before she actually became queen and was known as the heir apparent, there was a lot of things that she led that were a fairly normal life as far as royals go. She served in the military, which was common thing for royals to do, and she served as a mechanic. Thus the reason why she knows all these things about cars, and she's sort of a car enthusiast herself. So let me get started, or let me continue. I've already gotten started. Her Majesty has an array of personal vehicles. Her state vehicles, as well as their specifications, are going to be discussed in segment 3, like I said earlier. But among her personal vehicles, and of course, keep in mind, this list may not be necessarily up to date. I have to go off of what the internet gives me. Some of these cars may currently be owned by the Queen. Others of these may have been donated to museums. Others may have been sold at auction. These are just some of the cars that she's owned over her. Oh my gosh, she's turning 95 in 10 days. So over her 94-year life, almost 95 years. So let me just tell you some of these things about her cars. These include a 2002 Land Rover Defender with a 4.2-liter V8, personally received from Land Rover as a gift, and it was fully customized to Her Majesty's specifications. It was sold at auction for £30,240, which is about $44,992.68 in 2021 U.S. money. And I would say that's actually really cheap. To own a car that was owned by Her Majesty the Queen, I would expect that thing to go for hundreds of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. But nah, only $45,000 just about it went for. So whoever got that was super lucky, I would say. And she has a 2001 Jaguar Daimler V8 Super, which is a long wheelbase model. It's likened to sort of an XJ8 Volant Plus. This specific trim of the XJ8 is not sold in the United States. It is most similar to what we have as the XJ8 Volant Plus, which is the top of the line XJ8 you can get if you're looking for luxury. The XJR is the top of the line for sport. This was her personal vehicle for 3 years. Modifications include an armrest designed specifically for her handbag and a special switch that funnels fresh air into the car because it is, quote, she has, quote, said that she likes fresh air when she is driving, but not directly in her face. Very elegant, very queen-like, if you ask me. Other cars include 2016 Bentley Bentega, which was the very first order that was given to her, or not the very first car that was given to her. It was the Bentley Bentega of the very first order. She was given the first one. A custom-built 2015 Range Rover long wheelbase Landaulet. Landaulet is how it's pronounced. Landaulet means the car is a partial convertible in which the rear portion of the roof folds down. This is common with heads of state because they are able to stand up or sit down in an elevated position and then wave to the crowds through an open top car. If I could, let's see. If I can give an example of a Landaulet that's famous in America. John F. Kennedy's Lincoln, his presidential limousine, that was a Landaulet. It was the back part of it open, or actually, that wasn't a Landaulet. The whole thing was a convertible. Okay. But the Landaulet, you can imagine, it's sort of the opposite of a Targa top. A Targa top is also a partial convertible, but the front part of the roof opens up, so it's meant for more of the driver's enjoyment. A Landaulet, a lot less common, is meant for the rear passenger's enjoyment, common in chauffeur-driven cars, just like this Range Rover that the Queen has. She has a 1965 Mercedes-Benz S600 Pullman Landaulet, and this is actually very interesting, because being the British monarch, granted, the Queen has a lot of German ancestry. She's directly related to King George I, a direct line of succession from King George I to Queen Elizabeth II. He was of German extraction. He was literally taken from Germany and plopped on the British throne because the next person in line for the British throne was a Catholic, and Catholics weren't allowed to take, or are still not allowed to be the British monarch. So he was the next one in line that wasn't Catholic. He was taken from the Kingdom of Hanover, which is now part of Germany, and then he was put on the British throne. So he was King of Hanover and King of England at the same time, and he is of German extraction. He's 100% German. And Queen Elizabeth is of German ancestry, but funny enough, because of so much anti-German sentiment during World War I and World War II, they really distanced themselves from their German roots. In fact, a fun fact I would say is that Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which was the consort to Queen Victoria, who was the last monarch of the House of Hanover, because once a female monarch takes place, and then her husband, their children typically take the husband's last name, and that's the House of. So he was of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Well, in the early 1900s, right around World War I, anti-German sentiment caused them to change it to the House of Windsor, which is a very British-sounding name, but the House of Windsor is actually one and the same as the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. But anyway, back to the cars. So she's German, but it is very not it is not socially acceptable, essentially, for members of the British royal family to be seen in German vehicles or driving German vehicles, especially since Britain has a long history of producing vehicles themselves. I am biased towards German vehicles, obviously, because not necessarily that I like German vehicles, but it's because British vehicles have always been so dang bad. So I'm just obviously biased to what I know is better. German vehicles are objectively better than British vehicles. But because they're the British royal family, she is not seen driving around in this Mercedes-Benz S600 Landaulet. This is probably part of her personal collection, probably in a museum somewhere. Probably she never used it for herself. A funny thing, the next car on the list is a 1950 Lincoln Cosmopolitan limousine. This was actually a presidential limousine made for Harry Truman, and according to the source that I read, it is a mystery how this car ended up in the Queen's personal collection, but nonetheless, she has an American car, an American presidential limousine that was made for Harry Truman. She has a 1924 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. If you remember, we've had several podcasts on the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. It's been mentioned several times. It was one of the most influential cars ever as part of the most recent series that I did, and there was also a podcast dedicated to the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. She has a 1953 Land Rover Series 1. The Queen is known for having Land Rovers and Range Rovers. This seemed to be her favorite vehicles. And she has a 1992 Daimler DS420, also used by the Danish royal family for funerals. Because as you know, one may not know, but all the royal families of Europe are related, chiefly through Queen Victoria. And if not Queen Victoria, Christian, then... Ooh, pardon me, I had to sneeze there. Oh dear. Anyway, live recording, folks. This is what happens. Chiefly, if not through Queen Victoria, Christian IX of Denmark. They are known as. Pardon. More sneezing to ensue. Anyway, they are known as the grandmother and grandfather of Europe, respectively. More sneezing. Anyway. So here we have the Queen's car collection. It is said that the Queen's car collection is worth more than 10 million British pounds, or about 13,700,000 US dollars. And despite all of her rare cars, she is still seen driving a relatively humble car, a Range Rover. So that's basically the Queen's car collection. Of course, like I said, there are several vehicles that the Queen is said to have owned, that the Queen currently owns. This list obviously does not do it justice. She has a Vauxhall station wagon that was one of her first vehicles that she had. She has a number of French cars. I think she had a British Ford at some point. I mean, the Queen has a lot of vehicles. And frankly, if I were 95 years old and filthy rich, I would have a lot of vehicles too. So there you have it. Let's stay tuned for the next segment of the podcast, in which I'm going to be discussing some of the cars of the lesser royals of the British royal family. So please stay tuned, folks.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So we discussed in segment 1 why this is a special edition of the GSMC Car Podcast, why we're doing solely British royal family focused car podcast because of his passing. His Royal Highness's passing, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, on Friday at the age of 99. So here we are in segment 2, cars of the other royals. The late Prince Philip that I just mentioned had Aston Martin Lagonda 3-liter drop-head coupe. That was a 1959 model, or 1954, 1959. I can't tell what that number is. The first Aston Martin Lagonda to be commissioned by the royal family. It had a phone that Prince Philip used to use to make prank calls to Prince Charles and Princess Anne, which are his son and his daughter, respectively. This really captures the spirit of Prince Philip. He was very much a character, very much a jokester, and very much like, breaking the ice with a constant sense of humor that would use to lighten the mood and that made people very comfortable around him. So, of course, his car would have a car phone that he would use to prank call his son and daughter. It's perfect Prince Philip. That's perfect Prince Philip. This Aston Martin Lagonda sold in 2016 for 350,000 British pounds, or $527,674.63. That was one of those cars that sold a lot. It sold for a lot of money. They didn't sell a lot of these. And they said that that value that it sold for, the money that it sold for, was about 3 times as much as a regular Aston Martin Lagonda drop-head coupe from this time period would be worth. He also had an Alvis TD21, a Series 2 drop-head coupe. This sports car caught the eye of Prince Philip, actually, at the London Motor Show in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. He had it ordered with a 5-speed ZF gearbox, a taller windshield, and an electronically folding roof. And I guess the reason why he had the taller windshield on it was because, Prince Philip was a rather tall man. Prince Philip was probably over 6 feet tall. If not over 6 feet tall, right around 6 feet tall. He was rather tall. And frankly, the British cars of this time period were a lot smaller than cars these days. And I think my theory is that people have just gotten bigger over time. So people back in the 50s probably didn't need such a large car. And plus, being a European car, European cars have always been smaller than American cars anyway. He also had some other vehicles that are not mentioned in this podcast, but he seemed to have been a fan of sports cars because, he's a prince. He doesn't have to haul his family around. The state does that for him, so he can drive his own personal vehicles. And I'm sure if you watch The Crown, you can see some of the other vehicles that he owned over the years as well. He had this car, and this car is actually still owned by the royal family. It is still on display at Sandringham House, which I believe is in Scotland somewhere. I don't know. I'm not British. I wouldn't know. And the late Princess Margaret, moving on to another member of the royal family who has since passed, she passed away in 2002. The late Princess Margaret had a 1980 Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith 2, which was a long wheelbase model. The car that she kept longer than all of her other vehicles, and it was ordered in cardinal red and famously loaned to Ronald and Nancy Reagan whenever they were in the UK. This car would be on loan not only to Ronald and Nancy Reagan, but sometimes Her Majesty the Queen would use it. Sometimes Prince Charles would use it. Sometimes, anybody who really needed it would use it. I guess Princess Margaret was generous like that. That's Princess Margaret's car. Very elegant vehicle. Probably one of the more stuffy British vehicles on this list. Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith. All the other ones seem to be a bit more fun, but it's funny that Princess Margaret would have such a stuffy vehicle, because she wasn't a very stuffy personality. She truly embraced royal life, but she wasn't a very stuffy personality. But anyway, moving on to Prince Charles, who, as we all know, is the next in line to the British throne, and he is now the new Duke of Edinburgh after the passing of his father. So he is Duke of Cornwall and Edinburgh. But he was gifted a Seychelles Blue Aston Martin DB6 Volant as a present for his 21st birthday. His first car was actually an MGC GT, I believe, which is another British sports car. But Prince Charles has seemed to always have an affinity for Aston Martin. The Queen likes Land Rover and Range Rover. Prince Philip seemed to like his sports cars, not necessarily a specific brand. And Prince Charles likes Aston Martin. He's chiefly driven Aston Martins. And this Seychelles blue Aston Martin that he had as a present for his 21st birthday, as far as I know, is still owned by him. And he being the ever environmentalist concerned with matters of the environment, Prince Charles had it modified to run on biofuel, which was based off of wine and cheese. Isn't that the most British, pretentious thing ever? Like, you have a car, and because you're so concerned for the environment, you have it modified to run on wine and cheese. I think that's the most hilarious thing ever. But apparently it uses about 4.5 bottles of wine per mile, so it's not necessarily the most, I don't know, can I say it's not the most wine-efficient vehicle? Can I coin that term? It's not very wine-efficient because it used 4 bottles of wine per mile? I just think that's absolutely hilarious. But anyway, so yes, it's not the most wine-efficient vehicle on the road. Probably the only wine-powered vehicle I've ever heard of. But anyway, moving on. So, yeah, it's made to run on wine and cheese, but he has some more practical cars whenever he chooses to drive himself around. He has a 1989 Aston Martin V8 Vantage Volant, which is a gift from the Emir of Bahrain. He had some of the trimmings taken off to make it look less beefy, because Prince Charles, as you know, is not a very showy character. He's more so reserved, much like his mother, Her Majesty. So he had this super awesome Aston Martin V8 with like a spoiler and flared fenders, and when he got it from the Emir of Bahrain, he had the spoiler removed, and he had the fenders replaced with less flared fenders, just so the car would seem less beefy and command less attention. Thankfully, he did not get rid of the more powerful engine, so I guess his priorities are straight. He doesn't want it to he doesn't want it to look very fast, but he still wants it to be very fast. And Princess Royal, which is the Queen and the late Prince Philip's only daughter, one of her famous cars was a Reliant Scimitar. A Reliant Scimitar GTE. It's a 1970 model. Now, Reliant is most known for their 3-wheeled monstrosity, the Reliant Robin. And the Reliant Robin has been the butt of several jokes on shows like British Top Gear, because it is a British 3-wheeled city car that was made, probably sometime in the 60s or the 70s. But the Reliant Robin, instead of using the layout that most 3-wheeled cars have, which is 2 wheels in the front and 1 wheel in the back to make it more stable, the Reliant Robin has 1 wheel in the front and 2 wheels in the back. So anybody who's familiar with the Reliant Robin and the butt of the jokes, the Reliant Robin would flip over all the time. Anytime you took a corner that was too fast, the car would flip over. It would just flip onto its side because it was so unstable and unsteady. And the fact that some people drove these vehicles is actually very concerning to me. I would think that in modern times, if a car manufacturer were to design a vehicle that's that unstable, that was constantly flipping over, they would be the subject of a lot of class action lawsuits. They would be like, well, if you owned a Reliant Robin and you were involved in a rollover crash and you suffered injuries to your head, neck, and back, you are entitled to compensation. That's what I would imagine if that car was sold in the 21st century, what would happen. But this is just one of the very, very bad British cars that have been rolled out of England. But nonetheless, and the Princess Royal doesn't have a Reliant Robin. She has a Reliant Scimitar, which I had no clue the Reliant Scimitar even existed up until I was doing research for this special podcast. The Reliant Scimitar is it's a hot hatch. That's the only way I can describe it. It's a hot hatchback made by Reliant, the same vehicle company that made the Robin that constantly flipped over. The Reliant Scimitar actually actually is like a cult classic of a sort. It's a hot hatchback that, was made in the 1970s, 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds, which was very good for the time period, especially of a European car. And not only that, it has a top speed of 120 miles per hour. In fact, Anne, the Princess Royal, is so attached to these cars, loves them so much, she's owned 9 of them over the years, and Princess Royal is in her 60s. So this is a very, very interesting vehicle, nonetheless. And of course, what British car podcast would be complete without mentioning the late Princess Diana, Princess of Wales. She had a 4-seater Jaguar XJ SC, which is a 1987 model, and she had it specifically fitted with 2 extra seats for her 2 children, Prince William and Prince Harry. She loved her children very much, and that reflected, obviously, in the car that she owned. And she had a 1991 Mercedes-Benz 500 SL. Now, back to what I had said about the British royal family being seen driving German vehicles. Because of anti-German sentiment, this car was, the subject of a lot of media attention, a lot of scrutiny for the Diana, Princess of Wales. So, essentially, because of the social pressures, she was forced to give the car back. This is the most ridiculous thing ever. I just don't understand. I do not understand at all. So, essentially, because Princess Diana, and this is the 90s. This is the 90s. For as far as we know, the Germans and the British have made up since after World War II, which by the 90s had been 50 years since it had ended. They forced the woman to give the car back because it wasn't British. And they full and well know how terrible British cars are. So they made Princess Diana give the car back because it wasn't British. But after her divorce from Prince Charles in the mid-90s, she was known to have an Audi convertible of sorts. And at that point, she had made up her mind that she was going to drive a German vehicle. And because she was no longer connected to the British royal family, she didn't have to give the car back. And it's actually funny because some of the other cars that more the younger members of the royal family drive. Prince Harry drives an Audi. He has an Audi Avant station wagon, I believe, and Prince William, I believe, has an Audi as well. If not an Audi, a Mercedes-Benz. He has one of those, and he has a sports bike as well. He likes his motorcycles apparently. So yeah, that's the cars of the British royal family, the lesser members of the royal family at least. Princess Diana sadly passed away in 1997. As everybody knows, she was in a car crash in Paris after being chased by the paparazzi. Lots of media scrutiny, lots of backlash against the royal family for, how they acted in the circumstances around Diana's death. So, yeah, you all could look that up. This is a car podcast. I'm not going to get into that. But, yeah, there's all that. So please stay tuned for segment 3, in which I'm going to be discussing the Bentley State Limousine, which is the bee's knees when it comes to state limousines, honestly. One of the more advanced ones in the world to protect Her Majesty the Queen and the senior members of the royal family. So please stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So the Bentley State Vehicle is what we're discussing in Segment 3. You've heard about Segment 1, which was basically the Queen's personal vehicles. You've heard about Segment 2, the personal vehicles of other members of the royal family. And then you have Segment 3, the State Vehicle. So the official state car made by Bentley for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was given to her on her Golden Jubilee in 2002. And only 2 of these cars exist. So what is the Golden Jubilee? The Golden Jubilee is the Queen's 50th anniversary on the throne, which I believe she is one of 3 or 4 British monarchs to ever serve 50 plus years. I believe the other ones were James the First and Fourth of Scotland. James the First and Fourth, he was the first of England, the fourth of Scotland, because that was before the union of the crowns. I believe there was Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria, and then Queen Elizabeth II. I believe those are the 4 British monarchs, if I am not mistaken, to serve more than 50 years on the British throne. Given to her by her 50th anniversary on the throne in 2002. And yes, this is the one that she's been using since. She's had a number of other state vehicles in the past, but these are the ones that she's been using. This bulk of a vehicle is powered by a modified 6.75-liter V8 that produces 400 horsepower and 660 pound-feet of torque. The top speed is 130 miles per hour. This state car is based off of the contemporary Bentley Arnage. So the Bentley Arnage was the Bentley flagship sedan of the time period that this is based off of, and it was 3 feet longer and 3 inches wider. So this is likened to the American presidents, the Beast. Like Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, those are the presidents that have been known to be chauffeured around in the limousine called the Beast, which is a vehicle specifically made for the President of the United States by Cadillac, and that's based off of a truck platform that's huge, that's overbuilt in every single way, shape, and form. Very robust, very modern with its safety features, and very, very armored. This thing is a rolling fortress. This is the British version of that. I heard the article that I was doing this research off of was like, yeah, this puts the presidential limousine to shame. As much as I love the British royal family, and as much as I'm an obnoxious, unashamed fan of the British royals, it does not put the Beast to shame. This car is 19 years old. Granted, I'm not saying it's in a disrepair because of its age, but it is still 19 years old, and it does not compare to the Cadillac One, which is colloquially known as the Beast. This is a British car. This is a British car that's used for the royal family, but I would say, and not by any disrespect to the royal family, because anybody who knows me knows I would never disrespect the royal family, but the President of the United States commands a lot more attention and commands a lot more protection than the Queen of the United Kingdom. Because the Queen of the United Kingdom is not the most powerful person on earth. The Queen of the United Kingdom is probably also not the most hated person on earth. The President of the United States has a lot of enemies. A lot of enemies that are willing to do a lot of things to do him a lot of harm. So, there's a reason why the Cadillac One, which is the presidential limousine of the President of the United States, is a lot more armored and a lot more advanced than the Bentley State Limousine. The Queen, far and wide, is a very much beloved figure. Granted, there are some crazies out there who would like to do her harm, but that's with anybody who's famous. There's always a crazy person out there who wants to do a famous person harm, just so they can get notoriety or whatever their other sick desires are. But for as far as the Queen goes, far and wide, she doesn't command as much protection from the royal from the British public as the American president does. And not only that, the Queen also has a royal yacht, and the England has also been known to have the most advanced navy because they are a maritime country. They are an island, so the United Kingdom, being a series of islands, needs a very strong military presence on the waves. So if it's anything that's going to compare to what the United States has for its president, is probably the royal yacht, not the royal car, because they are the ruler of the seas. Rule Britannia or Britain rule the waves. I mean, that's what they're known for. But I digress. So yeah, this car is quite something. Based off of the Bentley Arnage, the coach doors, which are also known as suicide doors, open up to 90 degrees in the back, just so the Queen has plenty of room to enter and exit as she pleases. The glass is all armored, obviously. The car can be made airtight in case of a gas attack. And it is also blast resistant, and the tires are Kevlar reinforced, so they're basically impenetrable. So the Queen, if any sort of threat would happen, the people who are chauffeuring around can get away from the situation very quickly in order to keep Her Majesty safe. The Bentley has a series of different hood ornaments. Now, this is very interesting. The Bentley has a series of different hood ornaments that are used in separate engagements. When the Queen is on board, the Flying B, which is the Bentley hood ornament that would typically be on the car, is replaced by a figure that is made of solid silver of St. George slaying the dragon, which is a very English symbol. I mean, that's super English. Not necessarily British per se, but very English. In which that hood ornament is used when official business is being done. And when official business is being done in Scotland, however, it is replaced by a lion, because the lion is the symbol of Scotland. So it is, it's several different hood ornaments for several different occasions. And the Bentley is claret and black. Claret is sort of a wine red sort of color. Like all state limousines, it's claret and black, a two-tone paint scheme. And in 2009, both were converted to run on biofuel. So yeah, that's basically the Queen's car that she is most likely seen being chauffeured around in. This is a very, very important vehicle, obviously, because it protects the Queen and the royal family. But it also shows you how much the British public love their Queen, even though there is so much monarchist sentiment and whatnot. If they're able to get a car company to build a car like this, granted they pay them quite a bit, but if they're able to get a car company to build a car like this, you show, they really do love the Queen and the royal family. But yeah, this is actually the first vehicle, state limousine to be made by Bentley. The other ones have been traditionally Rolls-Royces. And if you're wondering about what the Prime Minister is driven around in, the Prime Minister is driven around in I believe a Jaguar XJ. It's an armored Jaguar XJ, which is a long wheelbase model. Prime Ministers have always been seen in either Jaguars in recent years, or way back earlier, they were seen in Rovers, Rover P5, but Rover has been defunct since, I believe, 1967, in which it was replaced by British Leyland, which was defunct in like the 1980s, and then it was split from there. Jaguar, Range Rover, Bentley, all the other ones went different ways. But yeah, so basically that's what the Queen is driven around in. So lots of different cars that have been used by the British royal family over the years, either for state purposes or for personal use. These people are a lot more like normal people than we think. They're a lot more like normal people than we think. I mean, they've got cars just like we do. And it's one of the reasons why, I'm very happy that I got the chance to do this podcast. Granted, I probably should have done it under better circumstances. I shouldn't have waited until His Royal Highness Prince Philip had passed away. But nonetheless, circumstances call for certain things. So I've done this podcast on the British royal family and their vehicles. It's just to really, show people what it is like to be a member of the royal family, to have these cars, given to you, essentially. They're the gifts, or they're bought by the royal family, and it's just, they're normal, but at the same time, they're not normal. It's a weird sort of dichotomy when it comes to these people, because they have cars, obviously, but their cars are not like normal people cars. Their cars are specifically made just for them. They keep their cars a lot longer than normal people do, because they probably don't have to pay much for the maintenance of these cars, because it's probably included in the package of being a royal. But I should probably do another podcast on some of the cars by some of the Middle Eastern royal families. I believe the Sheikh of Dubai or something like that. Let me look it up real quick, actually, because Doug DeMuro was talking about a car. Let's see. There was the Bentley Commander or something. The Bentley Dictator, was it? Let's see. The Bentley... No. It was the Bentley Commander or something. Hold on a second. Oh, man. No. Oh, my goodness. I think it was the Bentley... Was it a Bentley Dictator? No, the Bentley Diplomat, was it? Oh, I can't think of it. Let's see. Oh, just wait on a second. While I'm looking this up, essentially it was made for a Middle Eastern royal family. I can't think of it. Oh my goodness. That is crazy. What? Every single time I'm looking up a Bentley SUV, it's the Bentley... Oh my goodness, it's the Bentley Bentega. But I swear to you, this is real. There is a British, not a British, there is a royal family in the Middle East that has a huge car collection, and of these one-off cars, like made specifically for him and his family. And I can't remember what his title is. I don't know if it's the Emir of Bahrain. Let me look it up. I'm going to look this up. The yes, the Sultan of Brunei. That's who it is. Okay, the Sultan of Brunei. Oh my goodness. The Sultan of Brunei has an eclectic car collection. And when I'm talking about eclectic car collection, I'm talking about an eclectic car collection. This man has these cars. I'm sorry for so many pauses, but I had to look it up. And one of the cars, it was a Bentley SUV. Bentley made for the Sultan of Brunei. Let's see. Yes, it was the Bentley Dominator. That's what it is. Okay. Wow. I hope the podcast folks aren't upset with me because I had to look this up. But it was the Bentley Dominator. It came with a hefty price tag of £3 million back in 1994, and it is the long-lost ancestor of the Bentley Bentega and the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. So that is the royal family that I want to do a podcast on his cars. That royal, he's the one that I want. The Sultan of Brunei. That's the one I want to do the podcast on. And you know, stay tuned for that because that one's going to take a lot longer to research because these cars are just so rare and one-off. But when I finally get together, I'm going to do a podcast on this, and you all will be blown out of your minds. And I'll put pictures on the Instagram too. So, but anyway, now that I've sufficiently wasted time looking that up and trying to remember what on earth it was, please stay tuned for the last segment of our podcast, which is going to be dedicated to the memory of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. So please stay tuned for this last segment. You're going to want to hear it.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, car folks. So you have heard about the cars of the British royal family, and you have heard about the Queen's personal cars, the personal cars of other members of the royal family. And this last segment is going to be a tribute to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Essentially, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, why I chose to do it was to somehow pay respects in such a way while still relating it to cars. But this last segment is going to be devoted to his memory. So the tribute to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. On April 9th, 2021, it was announced that by Buckingham Palace that His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, had passed away. This is actually what the official statement had said. It is with great sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces, it is with deep sorrow. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family joined with people around the world in mourning his loss. And I had woken up to that on Friday morning. And I was taken aback. And of course, the circumstances surrounding his passing. The Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, had retired from official royal duties about 4 years ago in 2017 at the age of 96. He would have turned 100 this year on June 10th, which is just 2 months away. But at the age of 96, he retired from official royal duties because it was just a precautionary measure, as his health was not as great as it used to be, and he just couldn't keep up with the rigors of public life anymore. And because he has no obligation to, well, I can't say he has no obligation. That's not exactly the correct term, I should say. He is not the monarch, so he does not have to constantly be everywhere. The responsibility does not lie on his shoulders. The responsibility of being monarch rests on the Queen's shoulders. So he was able to retire, whereas the Queen will never retire. So he was able to retire from his public duties, and he had, experienced some health issues. He had an infection of the bladder a few years ago. He had a hip replacement, and his most recent stay in the hospital had been his longest stay ever. He had spent a month in the hospital due to an infection that we probably will never know what the infection was. And frankly, we don't need to know because that's his own personal business, him and his family. They're still people. They deserve privacy. So he had an infection of sorts, and then he was later wheeled into heart surgery, I guess in a bid to extend his life, because whatever infection he had really ravaged his health to the point where it is rumored that, he was given a month to live about a month ago when he had been released from the hospital on March 16th. So really not even a month, about 3 weeks after he was released from the hospital, he passed away. And so that's what was really the circumstances around his death. He was 99 years old. He was 99 years old, and it was a life well lived. A life well lived, nonetheless. A life well lived, for sure. So I have to mention what my personal tribute was on Facebook for Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. So I'm going to look up my post here. Let's see. Wow, I guess I have had a lot of yeah, there it is. I've got a lot of interactions on Facebook lately. But I said, dear friends and family, it is with great sorrow that I tell you that His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, has passed away at the age of 99, 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. Prince Philip was born in 1921 on the island of Corfu in Greece. His grandfather was George I of Greece. Also a descendant of Queen Victoria, he married Princess Elizabeth of York, now Queen Elizabeth II, in November of 1947. He was the longest-serving prince consort in the history of the British royal family, as well as the oldest ever male member. He will be remembered for his unbreakable spirit, fun and witty sense of humor, and deep love for his wife, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Please join me in prayer for our dear Queen, who is undoubtedly very saddened by the death of her husband, 12 days shy of her 95th birthday. Rest in peace, Your Royal Highness. You will be missed. Prince Philip, June 10th, 1921 to April 9th, 2021. And so, yeah, that was the tribute that I paid to Prince Philip on Facebook. And I guess the reason why I should explain this, I've mentioned, I'm sure, the royal family in the 50-plus podcasts that I've done with the GSMC Podcast Network. But personally, to me, these people have been an inspiration my entire life. Why? Because I'm American, born in New Jersey, to Haitian parents. I am of Haitian descent. I should, on paper, not have anything to do with the royal family. But my mother is a Canadian citizen, and she had long appreciated the likes of Princess Diana and other members of the royal family, and she sort of passed down that appreciation to me, and I sort of took it and ran with it, in a sense. And the reason why I appreciate them so much is because they serve as an example of what it means to serve your country. And not only that, an example of what it means to have a strong sense of duty. There are so many people these days who tend to miss their sense of duty. And we ought to have a sense of duty in our everyday lives, even as common folk. Even when it comes to things as trivial as a sense of duty to your family, or as great as a sense of duty to your country, and even the sense of duty to your family is not trivial. A sense of duty ought to never be trivial. A sense of duty is what you ought to do. Not what you feel like doing, not what you wish you could do, but what you ought to do. And I feel like we are living in a day and age in which people only choose what they want to do, not necessarily what they ought to do. And the British royal family serves as an example, especially someone like Prince Philip, who had a thriving naval career, who had a thriving, life, apart from being, the husband of Princess Elizabeth at the time. But when King George VI suddenly passed away in 1952, while the two were still very young, he sprung into action. Mind you, the man is 31 years old by the time, George VI passes away. And Queen Elizabeth is about 25. He's 30, she's about 25. And, it's a shock. He had to give up his career in order to stay by her side and support her for the rest of his life, which would be 69 years. He has supported Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II has been on the throne since 1952. If she makes it to 2022, she will have been the only British monarch to ever celebrate their Platinum Jubilee, which is 70 years on the throne. And he was there for every step of the way up until recently with his death. He was there every step of the way. That is a sense of duty that I envy. That is a sense of duty the entire world should envy. And I know this is a car podcast, but I've done discussing the car stuff. The segment 4, I have decided to devote it to Prince Philip. And his sense of duty, is unsurpassed by anybody that I know personally, and by anybody probably in the world, save for maybe Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. He gave up his career. He couldn't give his children his last name. He gave up his royal titles of Greece and Denmark. He gave up his heritage in order to be with the woman he loved. And that is a true sense of duty. Over his life, he was a constant companion to Her Majesty. He was a good sounding board, as Anne Princess Royal would say about him in an interview that aired recently, probably recorded several years ago, but that aired recently. Good sounding board, someone that people could go to for sound advice. He was very direct, very firm, and very fair. They had known their father to be a very fun-loving man, but also a very direct man and very unapologetic. And he was probably the most normal of the royals. He did not care for fuss or decorum or pomp and circumstances. He cared to be genuine, and he cared to let the world know who he truly was as a person. And that is something that is very much admired, especially in the likes of the royal family, where these people have to live double lives. They have to live one life in front of the cameras and another life behind the doors. He was the same in front of the cameras as he was behind the cameras. Very stern, very fair, very direct speaking, and a fun-loving individual all around. He was a force to be reckoned with. So longest-serving consort in history and the oldest ever male member of the royal family. The British public will spend a period of 8 days of public mourning that will end on April 17th at 8 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which is the British time zone, at the morning of his funeral. So he will be buried on Saturday, April 17th. Because of all the COVID restrictions and whatnot, there will be a less of a public turnout. But nonetheless, I figure that the public might not listen to the COVID restrictions because of their sheer love for Prince Philip. But yeah, he's one that all of us can relate to, be it car enthusiasts, be it American, be it British, be it Australian, be it Haitian, Canadian, German, Japanese, Chinese, Mongolian, South African. All of us can relate to him because he was a common person. Yes, he had, ties to the royal family. He was part of the royal family. He was an integral part of the royal family. But the way he acted, he was a very common person. He acted normally. No pomp and circumstance, no fuss. He did everything in a sense of humility, but also in a sense of pride. And he worked very hard, and he was very, very dedicated to his country, his wife, his family. Something that we all can relate to on some level or another. So this has been a special podcast by the GSMC Car Podcast by your host, David Lucy Mabel, in commemorating the long life of His Royal Highness, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who was a lover of cars, a lover of engineering, a lover of technological innovation, and a lover of everything modern. So may he rest in peace, and have a good night. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Apple Podcast, all of the podcast networks out there you can find us on. Yes, please stay tuned for our next more normal episode. And thank you so much, and once again, have a good night. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.